Not a single hum. Not even the soft buzz of an old refrigerator. It was like someone pressed a mute button. The lights went out. The world's heart stopped beating. And we all just stood still. It's hard to even explain it, you know? One second everything's normal, and the next, chaos. If you're hearing this, then you're one of the lucky ones. Or unlucky. It's hard to say which at this point. You're still connected. Still tuned into a broadcast that's barely holding together. That means you're one of the few who didn't get swallowed up by the darkness or the floods or the fires. And that's saying something because, well, things have gone downhill fast. Maybe you heard the prophecies, the end of days, the plagues, the signs in the sky. But let me tell you, it's not like what they told us. Not at all. It's worse. It's real, and it's happening right now. Right outside your door. First, it was the sky. People were looking up, thinking it was some kind of weird storm. The clouds rolled in, dark and thick, and then that flash. Like a bolt of lightning, but longer, brighter. People dropped to their knees. I swear I could see the world changing in that split second. After that, the air felt wrong, heavy, and then it started. One disaster after another. Earthquakes shook the ground like the planet itself was breaking apart. Fires burned so hot they swallowed whole towns in minutes. And the floods, don't get me started on the floods. Whole cities just disappeared beneath the water. And then the sickness. The first wave hit the hospitals hard. Hospitals that, by the way, had no power. Nurses scrambling in the dark, trying to keep people alive with whatever they had. No lights, no machines, just people doing what they could to survive. But it wasn't enough. It never was. I know you're probably wondering what's causing it. The truth? We don't know. Scientists are still trying to figure it out. But it feels like something beyond us, beyond nature. And I'm not talking about some viral outbreak or natural disaster. I'm talking about something that feels, I don't know, other. The kind of thing that doesn't have a simple explanation. But we're not here to speculate about that. We're here to survive. And right now, it's about holding on. I saw a mother in the middle of what used to be a grocery store, clutching her child, both of them shivering from the cold. The power's been out for days, and all she could find were cans of soup. She was crying, but still trying to keep it together for her kid. That's what this is, right? People trying to hang on for their loved ones. And then there's the leaders, charismatic folks who've appeared out of nowhere. Some say they're chosen ones, others call them saviors. But you know what? In this chaos, I wouldn't put it past any of them to be telling the truth. Some of these people are the only ones who have a plan, or at least they make it sound like they do. But listen, this isn't just about them or the disaster. It's about you. It's about us. It's about what we're going to do next. We can't just sit here waiting to die. Not yet. If you're hearing me, you're still in this, and I need you to stay with me. We're going to walk through this together. The question is, how long do we have left? And where do we go from here? I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can tell you this. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot. So here we are, still breathing, still trying to make sense of everything that's happening. But let me tell you, it's not easy. People are struggling, and not just a little bit. No, this is the kind of struggle that strips everything away. Your humanity, your comforts, your sense of security. All of it. When the first wave of chaos hit, people didn't know how to react. It felt like we were all living in some kind of nightmare. The kind where you wake up. But the bad stuff is still happening. I watched a man stand in front of a supermarket, holding a bottle of water, like it was a lifeline. But he couldn't bring himself to go inside. Too afraid of what might be lurking behind those broken glass doors. People were terrified, and rightfully so. I don't blame them. But fear has a way of paralyzing you. It's like a fog that settles over everything, making it impossible to think straight. And you know what? It didn't get better. It only got worse. Have you seen the floodwaters yet? I don't just mean a river rising. I mean entire cities swallowed whole. Houses, cars, even people, gone in an instant. Some towns were hit so hard that not a single soul made it out. And it's not like we had any warning, right? The skies turned dark, then the storms came, and before we could even try to get out of the way, it was too late. That's how fast it happened. Like the earth was just tired of us, like it was fed up with the way we've been treating it for centuries. I talked to a woman yesterday. Her name's Sarah. She lives in what used to be a small town upstate. She told me that she and her family were just sitting down for dinner when the first quake hit. She thought it was just a small tremor, but then the walls started shaking, and the lights flickered, and then the ground just split. She said the sound was like the earth itself screaming. She managed to get out of the house with her 2 kids, but her husband, he didn't make it. Not because he didn't try to get out, but because the world just crumbled beneath them. That's how it's been for so many people. No warning, no time to think, just everything collapsing all at once. And it's not just natural disasters either. There's something else, something far more insidious. It's the way society is breaking down. People are turning on each other. At first it was a slow burn, little fights over resources, a few angry words exchanged, at checkpoints, people hoarding food, like it's going out of style. But now it's dangerous. Groups are forming. Survivalists, militias, you name it. And they're not interested in sharing or building a better future. They're interested in power, control. Some of them claim they've found salvation, but others, they're taking advantage of the chaos to create their own little empires. It's not just the powerful, though. It's the regular people, the desperate ones. I heard about a family in Texas who had to abandon their home after the water came up to the roof. They didn't have much, but they had enough to make it to the next town over. But when they got there, that's when they found out what desperation looks like. People don't trust each other anymore. Everyone's on edge, and I get it, I do. But you know what? That's not going to get us anywhere. If we're going to make it through this, we can't let fear tear us apart. We have to hold on to what makes us human, even if the world's gone mad. But then, you hear these stories of hope, right? In the middle of all this darkness, there are still glimmers of light. Like in one town, a group of strangers, people who didn't even know each other before this mess, came together to build makeshift shelters. They weren't perfect, but they were shelters. They were safe. They shared what little they had, made sure the elderly and children were taken care of, and slowly started to rebuild. That's the kind of thing we need right now. We need to remember what it means to be human in a world that's lost its humanity. That's what we're fighting for. Not just survival, but our dignity, our connection to each other. I talked to an old man the other day who said, if we lose our compassion, we've already lost. And I think he's right. But not everyone thinks like that. There's a lot of anger out there. People are angry at the government for not doing enough, angry at the world for falling apart, angry at each other for not being able to do more. Some of that anger is justified, sure. But I can't help but wonder, what are we really fighting for anymore? The government? Maybe not. The world we once knew? It's gone. But we can still fight for something real, something worth keeping. It's hard though, isn't it? When you're watching your world burn and crumble, it's hard to remember that. But we have to. I've been hearing whispers whispers that someone's found the key to survival. That there's a place, a haven where people are safe. Maybe it's just a rumor. But if it's true, then that's the kind of hope we need right now. A reason to keep going. So, what are we going to do? How do we keep going? Well, I'm not sure. But I do know one thing. It's the people around us that'll get us through this. Not the leaders. Not the saviors. Just regular people, working together, surviving together. But it's not going to be easy. We're going to need every ounce of strength we have. And I'll tell you what I've seen. It's not over. Not by a long shot. The days are starting to blur together. Time itself seems to be breaking down. The once predictable rhythms of life, waking up, eating, going to bed, are all gone. Now everything is just survival, minute to minute. It's like we're stuck in an endless loop of chaos, one disaster after another, each worse than the last. Let me paint you a picture of what's going on out there, as if the natural disasters weren't enough. Earthquakes, fires, floods. We've now got to deal with the collapse of everything we thought was solid. The government's completely ineffective. I don't know how many times I've heard someone say, the authorities haven't done anything. Or worse, that they've disappeared entirely. You'd think, in a time like this, the people we trusted to protect us would step up, right? But no. They're either holed up in bunkers or too overwhelmed to act. The ones left on the ground trying to organize some semblance of order? They're mostly just trying to keep their heads above water, like the rest of us. The military's out there trying to do what they can, but let's face it, they're stretched thin, and every day it's more and more difficult to keep any kind of control. There are reports coming in of entire regions just falling off the map. No communications, no rescue teams, no supplies. It's like whole parts of the world just vanished overnight. And the things that we once depended on, those things are crumbling too. Banks, markets, supply chains, gone. The internet's down in most places. People are relying on old school radio signals like this one, trying to get information, trying to keep in touch. But the truth, most people aren't getting anything at all. No updates, no leadership, just nothing. And what's left in the wake of all this? People who don't know how to deal with it. People who used to have jobs, families, and plans. Now, they're scavenging, just trying to survive. The good news? There are pockets of people still holding on to some kind of order. Communities forming where people work together to ration food, protect each other, share knowledge. But for every one of those communities, there are 10 others where chaos reigns, where anarchy is the only rule. I've heard the rumors about the rise of these so-called leaders, charismatic figures who claim to have the answers, to have found salvation or safety. Some are religious leaders. Others are just regular people who've somehow convinced their followers that they know the way out of this nightmare. You've got those promising refuge in hidden bunkers, those claiming they've discovered how to harness the power of the storms, and others still saying they can reverse the disasters. But you know what? It's hard to trust anyone in times like this. These leaders have their followers, sure, but I've seen too many people get burned by false promises. The reality? No one knows what's coming next. No one has all the answers. But we're all searching for something, anything, that can give us hope, even if that means holding on to a lie. But here's the truth. As raw and hard as it is, the end of days doesn't give us much room for hope. No, not the way we thought about it before. Before, we talked about hope in terms of solutions, of survival tactics, of building a new world. Now, it feels different. Hope isn't some golden ticket out of this. Hope is just the will to keep breathing when everything around you is collapsing. Hope is the belief that we can still do something together, even when we're at our lowest. Still, you can't help but look at what's happening and wonder, what's the end game here? If governments are gone, if society has crumbled, then what are we supposed to be holding on for? What's the point? I'm asking these questions not because I have the answers, but because I know you're asking them too. And I need you to keep asking, because that's the only way we'll get through this. By questioning what we've been told and what we've believed in. By finding new ways to keep going. I talked to a group of survivors last night. People who had been hiding out in an old school building when the floodwaters hit. They'd seen their homes washed away, their towns destroyed. But they hadn't given up. They formed a community of sorts. They scavenged for supplies, built makeshift barricades, and kept a constant watch for any signs of danger. I don't know how they managed to stay sane, how they kept going day after day, but they did, and if they can, we can too. But the question is, what next? That's what everyone's asking now, because if there's no help coming, if the rest of the world has fallen apart, then it's on us. We're the ones who have to pick up the pieces. It's not some distant future that's waiting for us. It's right here in front of us, and it's already happening. We have to decide how to face it. Do we fight, or do we just surrender to the chaos? I'm not going to tell you that I know the right answer, because I don't. I can only tell you what I've seen. And what I've seen is that even when everything seems hopeless, there's something inside people that refuses to give up. I've seen it in the way people cling to each other, the way they hold on to what's left of their humanity, even when the world is turning to ash. So, here we are. We're still standing, for now. But we can't keep pretending this isn't the end. We can't keep ignoring the fact that everything we've known is gone. All we've got now is each other. And that's both terrifying and maybe the only thing worth fighting for. So here we are. We've made it this far, somehow. But you know what's hitting harder now than anything else? The mental toll, the emotional weight, the stuff you can't always see. It's easy to talk about survival, about food and water and finding shelter, but there's another battle going on inside us, the one no one's talking about. I've seen it in people's eyes. The blank stares, the panic that grips them when the sun sets. It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting for the next disaster to strike. But what's worse is that there's no relief in sight. Every time things calm down for a moment, there's this undercurrent of anxiety. Like we're all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You can't escape it. It's in your bones. When was the last time you felt peace? Really felt it? I don't even remember what it feels like anymore. There's no normal. There's no tomorrow. There's just today. And sometimes just surviving, that feels like too much. Take Linda, for example. I met her last week in a small town that's somehow still standing. She's a nurse by trade, but now she spends her days trying to comfort the people who can't handle the stress anymore. She told me something that stuck with me. It's not the plagues or the storms or the fires that scare them anymore. It's the quiet, the silence, the nothingness that creeps in when the world is falling apart around you. It makes you think, how long can we keep holding on to hope when every day feels like the last? Linda's been seeing it more and more. People breaking. Some have a hard time even getting out of bed in the morning. I've seen it too. People who were strong, who were fighters, now just fading. It's like this slow, creeping despair. And I get it. How do you keep going when you don't know what you're fighting for anymore? And it's not just the adults. Kids. Kids who should be playing, running around with wide eyes, asking questions, are starting to get that same look. They're quiet. They don't ask where the food's coming from, or why there's no school, or why the sun isn't shining like it used to. They've learned not to ask those questions. They just know what's happening. They can see it on their parents' faces, in the way the adults look when they think no one's watching. the fear, the exhaustion, but it's not just fear, it's something else. It's this quiet rage building inside of people, at the world, at the government, at the systems that failed us. Everyone thought there was going to be a plan, that someone, anyone, would step up and say, "We got this. We'll get through it together." But no one did, and now we're paying the price for that failure. People are angry, but they don't know where to put that anger. So it builds up inside, festers, turns into resentment. And when that happens, it's easy for things to spiral out of control. I talked to a woman last night in a makeshift shelter. She was sitting with her head in her hands, just shaking. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that she'd seen her whole family wiped out in a matter of hours, just gone. And now, every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was their faces, those last moments before it all fell apart. She said the worst part wasn't the destruction, it was the feeling that she wasn't even allowed to mourn, that there was no time for grief anymore. People were too busy just surviving to let themselves feel the loss. I didn't know how to help her, honestly. What do you say to someone like that? What words are left when the world has already shattered? We've all got our own version of that story, our own losses, our own battles. Some of us are clinging to what we used to believe in. Some of us are holding onto memories of the past, but no one gets to escape this mental toll. And you know what? I'm starting to see something else too, a kind of numbness setting in. People are losing the ability to feel anything, like they're running on autopilot, just going through the motions, waiting for the next wave of chaos to hit. It's self-preservation, I guess, a coping mechanism. But it's dangerous, because when you stop feeling, you stop caring. And when you stop caring, you stop living. But here's the thing, the brain can only handle so much trauma before it starts shutting down. And that's where we're at now, isn't it? People are cracking under the weight of it all. They're reaching the point where they don't know if they can keep fighting. And I get it, I really do. This isn't a sprint. It's a marathon with no finish line, no rest stops, no guarantees. But maybe that's why we have to fight for each other. Now, more than ever. Maybe that's the only thing left that gives us any kind of hope. Reaching out to someone else. Sharing the load. Because at the end of the day, that's all we've got. Each other. I don't have any answers. I don't have a magic cure for the mental toll we're all carrying. But I do know this. We can't let it consume us. Not yet. Not when there's still a chance to fight back. So, if you're listening to this right now, and you feel like you can't go on, just remember, you're not alone in this. We're all here, feeling the weight of it together. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the reason we're still holding on. All right, let's get real for a second. The world's falling apart. We can all feel it. The air feels thicker, like we're all holding our breath, waiting for something even worse to happen. Every day's a gamble. But there's something I need to tell you. There are still victories happening out there, no matter how small they seem. I know it doesn't feel like it, especially if you're out there, trying to scrape by with nothing more than your wits and a little luck. But I've seen it. I've seen people coming together in ways I didn't think was possible. People who were strangers yesterday now working side by side just to make sure everyone gets through the night. Take this one town in Georgia, for example. A group of survivors, barely scraping by, decided to turn the local library into a community hub. At first, it was just a place to collect whatever supplies they could find. But then something incredible happened. They started to share stories, not just about the chaos, not just about how their homes were destroyed or their families torn apart. No, they started telling stories about who they were, about what they loved, about what made them human, even in the midst of all this disaster. You see, something happens when people start telling their stories. Something powerful. It reminds you that you're not just a body, a survivor, a number. You're a person. And when you hear someone else's pain, someone else's hope, it somehow makes your own easier to carry. That little library, it became the heart of that town. It was where people went when they needed a break from the madness, where they found comfort, where they realized they weren't alone in this. I heard one of the survivors, a woman named Maya, say something that stuck with me. She said, "When everything falls apart, we have to rebuild together. Otherwise, it's just ashes, and nobody survives in ashes." She was right. She got it, because that's what community is. It's not just about food and shelter. It's about connection. The ability to share something real with someone else, to feel like you're part of something bigger than just yourself. It's not easy, though. It's never going to be easy. Trust me. There are days when all I want to do is curl up in a corner and pretend none of this is real. But we can't. We can't afford to, because every time we come together, every time we share what we have, no matter how little we push back against the darkness, we show that even when everything else is falling apart, we can still hold on to the things that matter. I've seen people turning wrecked buildings into places of refuge, not just for shelter, but for life. Some are growing food in abandoned greenhouses. Some are setting up community kitchens, cooking whatever they can scavenge, making sure no one goes hungry. There's a group in northern Ohio that has started using the old highways to create new routes, just so they can travel safely between towns. The roads are cracked, overgrown, but they've turned it into something more than just a way to get from one place to another. They've made it a lifeline, a symbol that even in a broken world, you can still create something useful, something good. And yes, I've seen the opposite too. I've seen groups fighting over scraps, people hoarding what they have like it's the last meal they'll ever eat. I've seen how easy it is to fall into that mentality of me first, when it feels like the world's already given up on you. But that's not the story we should be telling. We can't let that be the story. If we're going to get through this, it's going to take all of us. Together. Look, I know it's hard. I know every day is a battle. But what we need to remember is that even in this broken world, there are still sparks of light. People still care. They're still fighting for something. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep going. A while ago, I came across a man who was trying to build a makeshift windmill out of old scrap metal. He wasn't much of a mechanic, just a regular guy who used to be a teacher. But he was determined to create a renewable power source for his group. When I asked him why he was doing it, he just smiled and said, "Because if we don't try, then we're done. And I'm not ready to be done yet." That's what I'm talking about. That's the spirit we need right now. But here's the thing, we can't just wait for others to start rebuilding. We have to be a part of it, each of us. Whether it's offering a hand to someone in need, teaching a skill, or just sharing a bit of food when you can. Every little bit counts. It's all part of a bigger picture that we're painting together. In these small victories, in these moments of connection, there's a kind of power we can't underestimate. It's the kind of power that can hold the world together, even when it feels like it's coming apart. We've got to keep looking for it, keep nurturing it, because without it, we don't have a chance. So, if you're out there right now listening to this, just remember, you are part of this. You are part of this new world we're building, even if it's hard to see it right now. You're not alone in this fight, and no matter how dark it gets, there will always be a spark of light somewhere. Sometimes, you just have to look for it. All right, listen up. We've talked about the world crumbling around us, about the emotional toll, about the small sparks of hope in a sea of darkness. But now, I think it's time we take a step back and look at what we, the survivors, can do. Not just to survive, but to understand what's happening, what's really going on. Because as much as we've been holding on to each other, We still don't know the full story. I know. You're probably thinking, who has the time to think about theories right now? We're just trying to stay alive. But here's the thing. Understanding why this is happening, how it's happening, might be our only chance to fight back. So stick with me here. First off, let's talk about the experts. Or at least the people we're still looking to for answers. You've probably heard bits and pieces of what's been said on the radio, or maybe even on some makeshift communications. Scientists, religious leaders, former government officials, they all have their own take on what's causing the end of days. But I'll tell you right now, no one has a clear answer. Some of the scientists out there are clinging to a theory about a massive disruption in the Earth's magnetic field. They think this could explain the constant natural disasters, the floods, fires, and earthquakes. If the magnetic poles are shifting, it could be causing massive instability in the planet's crust, kind of like the Earth itself is shaking off a bad hangover, trying to realign itself. The thing is, no one really knows if this is true, or if it's just the last desperate attempt at an explanation. Then there's the other theory, the one that keeps creeping up every time we have a quiet moment, that maybe this is something beyond natural. A lot of people are starting to say it's divine retribution. The end of days, Judgment Day, the kind of thing that's been written about for centuries. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a preacher or some so-called prophet claim to have the answers, talking about the 7 seals being broken, the 4 horsemen riding across the sky, the plagues and fires as signs of the apocalypse. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm also not saying they're right. The thing is, no matter where you stand on that argument, the result is the same. Everything is falling apart. And that's where things get tricky. Because even if we do have answers, even if we somehow figure out what's happening, that doesn't change the fact that we're stuck in the middle of it. We're knee-deep in the disaster, trying to survive, trying to make sense of a world that no longer makes sense. But let's not throw our hands up just yet. There are still some real efforts being made to figure out how to stop this, or at least slow it down. Some of the brightest minds left on the planet are working in small teams, pooling their knowledge and resources, trying to find some way to reverse the damage. But don't get your hopes up. Most of these teams are isolated. Communications are unreliable. Resources are scarce. And with the way things are going, it's hard to say if we'll ever see their findings. Still, there's one piece of good news. There's been talk about the potential for new technologies. Renewable energy solutions like solar and wind power are starting to make a comeback. They're simple, effective, and best of all, they don't rely on anything that's fallen apart yet. Some groups are working on ways to harness power from the chaos itself, using storm energy, or even scavenging old electrical grids for parts. Could it work? Honestly, no one knows. But they're trying. Then there's the scientists who are focusing on food. They're looking for ways to grow crops in places that have been ravaged by storms and fires. Vertical farms, hydroponics, using the smallest patches of land to feed whole communities. It's not a perfect solution. We're not going to be feeding the entire planet on lettuce and tomatoes grown in abandoned skyscrapers, but it's a start. And right now, a start is all we can ask for. But the truth is, no matter how many theories or ideas we throw at this, the real solution is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. The world's not going to magically heal because someone figured out how to fix the magnetic field or restore the power grid. The solution isn't just science. It's going to take more than that. It's going to take us, all of us. Here's the hard reality. If we want to survive this, if we want to rebuild anything, it's not going to come from some high-tech breakthrough or some quick fix. It's going to come from communities, from people who are willing to work together, to share, to innovate on the fly, and to keep moving forward. No amount of solar panels or wind turbines is going to save us if we're not willing to keep going. And this, my friends, is where we come back to what I was talking about earlier, community. It's the only way we're going to make it through this. That's not just a nice sentiment, it's a necessity. The people who are making a difference right now aren't the ones hoarding resources or hiding away. They're the ones who are finding a way to lift each other up, to collaborate, to create something new out of the mess we've inherited. So the question is, what are you doing? What are you willing to do to make a difference? Maybe it's time to stop waiting for someone else to save us. Maybe it's time we start saving ourselves together. There are no easy answers, and maybe there never will be. But one thing's for sure. If we're going to survive this, it's going to take everything we've got. And that means not giving up. Not now, not ever. Okay, it's getting real now. The cracks are showing everywhere, literally and figuratively. We can't keep pretending that everything's going to go back to normal. There is no normal anymore. The world we knew, the systems we trusted, the lives we lived, all of that is gone. What we're facing now is something raw and new. A world where every step we take is a challenge, where survival means constantly adapting to a reality that shifts under our feet. But here's the truth. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about finding a way to make something worth living for. And that's where we're at now. We're not just looking for a way to survive. We're looking for a way to rebuild. I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, the question has always been, what comes next? Once we've gone through all the pain, all the chaos, what do we do with the pieces of this broken world? Can we make something new out of it? Or are we just scavenging for scraps, hoping to hold on long enough to see the end? The thing is, I'm starting to think there is hope. Maybe not the kind of hope we used to have, the kind that came with promises of safety and comfort, but the kind that says we're still here, we're still fighting, and we're not going down without a fight. Look, we've seen some of the darkest sides of humanity in these days. We've seen people turn on each other, fighting over food, over resources, over scraps of what was once the good life. But I've also seen something else. I've seen people pulling together in ways that can only be described as extraordinary. People are fighting for each other now, in a way I didn't think we were capable of. There's a new kind of strength in the world, born out of necessity, born out of the fact that if we don't help each other, we won't make it. Simple as that. And that's the path to survival. It's not just about gathering supplies or hoarding things in the hope that we can ride out the storm. It's about building something better from the wreckage. It's about forging new alliances, creating new systems that can sustain us. But most of all, it's about keeping hope alive. Not as some abstract concept, but as a living, breathing force that drives us to act. I've heard some people say that the fight for survival is over, that what's left is just a matter of waiting for the inevitable. That's a dangerous thought. It's easy to fall into that mindset, especially when it feels like every day is just one more disaster after another. But the truth is, as long as we're still here, we still have a choice. We can still fight for something better. But it's going to take all of us working together. And let me tell you something, survival isn't just about the big stuff. It's about the little things. It's about waking up every day, looking around and deciding that today, you're going to make it count. Maybe it's something as small as helping your neighbor fix their shelter. Maybe it's sharing food when you don't have much yourself. Maybe it's telling someone, I've got your back, when the whole world feels like it's against them. It's in those little moments that we find the strength to keep going. And let me tell you, if we can keep doing that, if we can keep showing up for each other, we'll have a foundation strong enough to rebuild. It won't won't happen overnight. It might take years, but we'll get there. Slowly, piece by piece, we'll rebuild the world we lost. We'll rebuild it better, because this time, we won't make the same mistakes, but that's the long-term goal. What about the short term? What do we do right now with the world burning around us and every day feeling like a battle for survival? Here's the thing, survival doesn't have to look like it does in the movies. You don't have to be some lone hero surviving against all odds. We've been sold that myth, but it's not reality. Survival is about community. It's about coming together with the people around you, whether it's your family, your neighbors, or even strangers who've been thrown together by the chaos. It's about creating systems of care, of support, of mutual aid. That's where we start. Look, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We're still facing the hardest part of this. We're not out of the woods yet. There's no roadmap for what comes next. And I can't tell you with any certainty that things will get better right away. But I do know this. The longer we wait for someone else to fix it, the longer we wait for someone to give us permission to act, the more we risk losing the chance to rebuild it all. So we take what we have. We take the scraps, the ruins, the broken pieces, and we start putting them together, one small piece at a time. We start with what we can control, our communities. We start with trust, with action, with each other. We've all been through the worst of it, the fires, the floods, the plague, the breakdown of society. But every disaster has its end. And when the smoke clears, when the waters recede, when the dust settles, we'll still be here. And that's when we rebuild. That's when we stand up and say, we're still here, and we're going to make this world worth saving. We've come a long way, you and I. We've lived through the fires, the floods, the darkness. We've talked about the wreckage, the fear, the small victories. We've explored the desperation, the struggle, and the little moments of hope that keep us going. But now I want to leave you with something that's been weighing heavily on my mind. It's easy to look at all this, to see the world burning around us and think that it's all for nothing. To believe that this is the end, that everything we knew, everything we cared about is lost. It's easy to get caught in the cycle of despair, and trust me, I've been there. I've seen it, felt it. It's so tempting to throw your hands up and say, "Well, there's no point anymore." But here's what I've learned through all of this. There is a point. It's easy to forget that sometimes, when the world feels so fractured, so broken, but we're still here. We're still breathing. And that means we still have a choice. I know we're facing things we never imagined in our worst nightmares. The end of days wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to be plagues, fires, floods, or the sky itself, splitting open like a wound. It wasn't supposed to feel like the earth was collapsing beneath our feet. But here we are. And here's the truth. Even in the worst of times, there's something to fight for. There's something worth holding on to. I've seen it in the faces of people who've lost everything, and yet they still find a way to keep going. I've heard stories of families huddled together in shelters, sharing what little they have, supporting each other in ways I didn't think were possible. I've seen strangers become brothers and sisters, working side by side to build something new out of the ashes. Maybe it's not much yet, but it's something, and it's enough. So here we are, at the edge of everything. The question now is, what are we going to do with this moment? Are we going to let the darkness swallow us whole? Or are we going to find a way to stand together and say, no, not today, not while we still have a chance? I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. And I can't promise you that the road ahead will be easy. I can't promise you that everything will be fixed tomorrow or next week or even next year. But I can tell you this. There is power in the choice we make right now. There is power in choosing to believe that we are not the sum of our losses. We are the sum of our resilience. And as long as we keep fighting, as long as we keep building, as long as we keep finding ways to come together, we are not done. Maybe it's not about saving the world. Maybe it's about saving each other. Maybe it's about holding on to the things that really matter. The things that can't be destroyed by fire or flood or plague. The connections we make, the love we share, the communities we build. Because when the world falls apart, those are the things that remain. Those are the things that can't be taken from us. Those are the things worth fighting for. And so I ask you, what will you choose? Will you let the world's end be the end of everything, or will you choose to fight for something new, something better? We may be living through the last days, but that doesn't mean it's over. Not as long as we remember who we are. Not as long as we remember that, no matter what, we are still capable of finding hope, of finding each other, of building a future from the ashes, and maybe, just maybe, that's how we find salvation in the end. Stay with each other. Keep fighting. Keep building. You're not alone. This is where I leave you. I'll leave the final words with you because the story isn't really over, is it? We're still living it. Still fighting through it. Thanks for sticking with me all this time. I'll be here, and so will you. As we wrap up today's broadcast, I want to leave you with this thought. Despite the darkness we face, despite everything we've lost, there's still hope. We're still here. And as long as we keep moving forward, keep building, keep remembering each other, we're not truly lost. No matter what the world looks like around us, there's always something worth fighting for, always something worth remembering. So let's keep going, together. Even when things feel uncertain, remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. We might not have the past, but we have today, and that's enough to make tomorrow worth living for. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, if it helped you feel connected or maybe just a little less alone, please do me a favor, like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us. And if you want to hear more of these daily broadcasts, you can also support us by clicking the join button on our channel. Every bit of your support helps us keep going, keep sharing, and keep telling the stories that matter. Until next time, keep safe, keep strong, and remember, even in the silence, we are still here. You're still here, and that's all we need to keep moving forward. See you soon.